This is one of the few public clips of a Ukrainian soldier firing a next-generation light anti-tank weapon, an NLAW. And this is what it can do. It means just one Ukrainian can take out a Russian tank or armored vehicle. Thousands of NLAWs were supplied by the UK and Luxembourg, while numerous countries have sent other kinds of anti-tank weapons. We counted up all of the military aid promised Ukraine in just the first week of war. The European Union and 27 countries committed more than $1 billion worth of weapons and supplies for the fight. What could have taken months of bureaucratic approvals, political maneuvering, and logistical coordination happened in a matter of days. So why did so many countries race to arm Ukraine? What did they send? And what is it all worth? Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th. Within 24 hours, Lithuania, Poland, France, Estonia, and the United States all announced military aid for Ukraine. Biden approved $350 million in military aid. That became the largest single transfer of arms from U.S. warehouses to another country ever. It was the start of a flood of military supplies sent to Ukraine in just the first week of war, as protests around the world called for an end to the invasion.
Stop Russian aggression!
And the internet erupted over claims that the U.S. offered a different kind of help to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the chance to be evacuated. Zelensky reportedly answered, "I need ammunition, not a ride." On February 26th, 10 more countries announced they would send aid, including Stinger missiles, helmets, machine guns, and fuel. Many shipments broke countries' long-standing traditions of not sending weapons to active war zones. Berlin reversed course to send 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 surface-to-air missiles. On February 27th, 6 more countries announced millions worth of military shipments, including 5,000 anti-tank weapons. By the 5th day, a Russian military convoy was headed directly towards Kyiv. For the first time in its history, the European Union financed and purchased weapons for a country outside its borders, to the tune of $505 million. Europeans saw a much bigger danger in the invasion.
The target is not only Ukraine. The target is the stability in Europe and the whole of the international peace order. And we will hold President Putin accountable for that.
By the end of the first week, the US and NATO had sent more than 17,000 anti-tank weapons, like this Swedish-made AT-4.
В принципі, вона не така важка, як казалось до моменту її, поки ми не побачили. Тому, в принципі, освоїть можна.
Some of what the EU and US sent are newer weapons, like Javelin and Stinger missiles. But much of the military equipment shipped by European countries is older weapons from the Soviet era.
When Germany said we're going to deliver a couple of thousand air defense missiles, those were things which they had inherited from the GDR. So these are things which are 30 years old or more.
It's something of a benefit, since Ukrainian troops were largely trained on Soviet-era weapons. At the end of the first week, Russian forces had seized a city in the south, but Ukrainians were holding on to the capital.
He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined.
In the months leading up to the current conflict, the United States sent military equipment in anticipation of prolonged street fighting. 3 weeks after Russia's invasion, the U.S. promised Ukraine another $1 billion in weapons and supplies. The U.S. also announced $6.5 billion in military spending on the crisis, which includes sending more troops to Europe. There were already 9,000 U.S. troops stationed on the Polish side of the border, and other NATO members have doubled up on troops in Eastern Europe. It's a significant show of strength from a bloc of allies whose history helps explain how this conflict was sparked in the first place. NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, formed after World War II. 12 countries banded together to counter the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It was a mutual defense pact. Attacking one NATO country meant attacking all of them. Ukraine isn't a part of NATO, But after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it gave up thousands of nuclear weapons in exchange for a guarantee of security by the US, UK, and Russia. Starting in 1999, NATO brought in countries that had been part of the former Soviet bloc, like Poland and Hungary. The continued expansion has made Putin furious. He's made his case by claiming Western leaders promised not to expand NATO, even though there never was an agreement not to expand.
Сегодня достаточно одного взгляда на карту, чтобы увидеть, как западные страны сдержали обещание не допустить продвижения НАТО на восток. Попросту обманули. Мы получили одну за другой 5 волн расширения НАТО.
And back in 2008, after NATO's Secretary General promised Georgia and Ukraine that they could one day become members, Putin invaded Georgia. 6 years later, he annexed part of Ukraine and has since demanded that Ukraine be blocked from ever joining NATO.
Мы четко понимаем, что при подобном сценарии уровень военных угроз для России кардинально, в разы повысится.
Biden has said that the U.S. would fight back if any NATO country was attacked, but that U.S. troops will not enter Ukraine. So, without NATO troops or air power, can this military aid turn the tide? Ukraine's military spending was roughly 1/10 of Russia's in 2020, and their military counts 209,000 active members, less than a quarter the size of Russia's armed forces. The tank war is also uneven. That's why Javelin and NLAW missiles have become such an important part of the war.
Russian tanks have serious problems dealing with these things. So you run around in Russian tank units, you will think, where are those javelins and when are they going to hit me?
Ukrainians have used them to destroy numerous tanks and armored vehicles so far. But it's in the air where Russia truly dominates. Russia has more than 1,500 jets to Ukraine's 100, and that's what makes Stinger missiles so crucial. It's a surface-to-air, shoulder-fired weapon that can take down low-flying fighter jets or attack helicopters. But Stingers can only do so much. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky asked NATO for a no-fly zone, something NATO rejected completely.
І зараз я повторюю знову, якщо ви не закриєте наше небо, то це лише питання часу, коли російські ракети впадуть вже на вашу територію, на територію НАТО, на домівки громадян країн НАТО.
But to enforce a no-fly zone, NATO would have to fire on Russian planes that violate the zone. NATO would also need to destroy Russian surface-to-air missile defenses on the ground. All of that could risk a broader war with Russia. 1 month after the start of the war, Ukraine still controlled Kyiv. There's much talk of Ukraine's resilience, but the question remains if they can stand up to Russia alone, even with all this extra firepower.